begin with our lead story this evening. Now, Mr. Boris Johnson's visit to India comes at a time when he is under a lot of pressure domestically. He's under fire politically for visiting a party when COVID restrictions imposed by his own government were on in the United Kingdom. And that pressure is mounting, unsurprisingly, ahead of a re-election that he has to face. Now, while he faces the ire back home, his visit in India is a continuation of a series of high-profile visits diplomatically at a time when a lot of the Western world is hoping to nudge India towards an outright denouncement of Russia's moves in Ukraine. Now, India's line is very clear. We're against violence. We have condemned the violence against civilians in Bucha in no uncertain terms, but we're not going to take a position or say the words someone else wants us to just because they say so. So, in this context, the comments today from Mr. Boris Johnson were very interesting, where he said that after speaking with Prime Minister Modi, he has understood India's position much better. But the real story, truly, and the real headline, if one were to ask, from the meeting today is the progress made on a free trade agreement. In comments made today, Mr. Johnson did say that he hopes for an agreement before Diwali in October. Will that happen? Let's first listen in to some of the comments made today by Prime Minister Modi and the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
फ्रेंड, पिछले साल हमने दोनों देशों के बीच कॉम्प्रिहेंसिव स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनरशिप की स्थापना की थी और इस दशक में अपने संबंधों को दिशा देने के लिए हमने एक महत्वाकांक्षी रोड मैप 2030 भी लॉन्च किया था। आज की हमारी बातचीत में हमने इस रोड मैप में हुई प्रगति को रिव्यू भी किया और आगामी समय के लिए कुछ लक्ष्य भी तय किए। फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट के विषय पर दोनों देशों की टीम्स काम कर रही है। बातचीत में अच्छी प्रगति हो रही है और हमने इस साल के अंत तक एफटीए के समापन की दिशा में पूरा प्रयास करने का निर्णय लिया है। पिछले कुछ महीनों में भारत ने यूएई और ऑस्ट्रेलिया के साथ फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट का समापन किया है। उसी गति, उसी कमिटमेंट के साथ हम यूके के साथ भी एफटीए पर आगे बढ़ना चाहेंगे।
What we're doing is taking forward an ambitious 10-year roadmap for British-Indian relations that we agreed last year. It was great to see you at the G7, but since then the threats of autocratic coercion have grown even further. And it's therefore vital that we deepen our cooperation, including our shared interest in keeping the Indo-Pacific open and free. We're making full use of the freedom that we now have to reach a free trade agreement, a deal where you can lift those tariffs, you can, India, Narendra, on our machinery and apples. Actually, you've already done it on apples, so thank you for the apples. And in turn, we can lift the tariffs on your rice and textiles. We've already closed 4 chapters, and today we're announcing new measures to make it easier to export UK-made medical devices to India and ensure mutual recognition of UK higher education qualifications. And as the next round of talks begins here next week, we're telling our negotiators, get it done by Diwali in October.
Speak more on the significance of Mr. Johnson's visit to India, I'm joined now by Meera Shankar, former ambassador of India to the United States, and Nalin Surie, former High Commissioner to UK and former ambassador to China and Poland. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us. Ambassador Shankar, let me begin by just getting your take on what the most important piece of the visit is. We've honed in on the free trade agreement as the key unfinished business, which would be very significant to India. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, certainly. I think the push for a new trade agreement between India and the UK is important. Two-way trade in goods and services in 21 was for 3 quarters up to $21.6 billion. And investment by both sides has been growing. So there's about 14, sorry, not dollars, pounds. There was about 14 billion pounds worth of UK investment in India and about 10 billion pounds worth of Indian investment in the UK. So overall, it's a fairly robust relationship. And from India's point of view, we have a small trade surplus with the UK. So it would be important to see if we can push the trade agenda in ways which are mutually beneficial. And that is what has been agreed upon, that we follow the pattern of the India-Australia trade agreement, which was recently announced. The other major area where cooperation will be stepped up is in the defense and security partnership, where UK has agreed to work with India on Make in India in the defense sector. Of course, they don't manufacture a whole heap of defense equipment themselves, but they do have key inputs like engines for jet fighters, or they do make helicopters and so on. So there are areas where we could profitably cooperate with UK in the defense sector, particularly since they have expressed a desire to work with us in the Make in India framework, which means investment, technology collaboration, co-design, co-development, co-production. The third area I would say is climate change and green energy, where both sides have agreed to put $100 million on the table to support startups in this sector. And they will also try to expand their cooperation in clean energy, be it solar or be it wind energy. I think these would be the major takeaways from the visit, but also that we are going to work together in the Indo-Pacific, and we have welcomed UK's participation in the Indo-Pacific initiative, and especially the maritime security arm. And we hope to collaborate with them further and cooperate in this regard.
Ambassador Surie, as far as the free trade agreement is concerned, one of the speed bumps, if I were to say, is that India has not been very keen in lowering tariffs on some sections which would impact domestic manufacturers. For example, in something like foreign liquor, in whiskey, we have 150% of tariff on imported foreign liquor. That is something which the UK exports in large quantity. On cars as well, those tariffs are in place. And while we focus on Atmanirbharta, Make in India, we encourage domestic industry, how challenging will it be to fit in both of these opposing requirements and put them into a cohesive free trade agreement which works for both sides?
I think we should look at this question in perspective. The UK is not a particularly major trade partner of India. It is our 17th trade partner. If I'm not mistaken, our trade with Bangladesh is more than that with the UK. It is our 6th largest investment partner, way behind some of the others. Now, the reason why the FTA has always run into problems, even if you look at the roadmap 2030, the issues which the British keep raising have not changed in the last 15 years. When I was High Commissioner 10 years ago, the issues were the same. They want concessions in areas where we cannot give them, and they don't want to give us access where we want access. Now, I think the question is, how far can we have a balance of concessions? So far, I have not seen that balance of concessions. The fact that we are still looking at October 2022 to come to some kind of a framework agreement would suggest to me that the balance has still not been arrived at. But I think we have to understand that the importance of the UK for us is not so much on the trade side. The UK has many other areas which are of particular interest to us, apart from the issues of the niche areas of defense technology where they have advances in. They have a very substantial and very significant R&D sector in their universities from which we can benefit enormously. They are very advanced in cyber, and as you know, we've signed this agreement on cyber security today. They are very good on education. Education collaboration has not moved ahead as it should have. Many initiatives have been taken in the past, but the English invariably seek one-sided benefit. And very important, the City of London, which is one of the oldest financial centers in the world and will remain post-Brexit a very, very important center for finance. So I think there are other benefits which we need to draw from the UK. I don't think trade is, from my perspective at least, the most important area where we can get advances from them, particularly now that the UK has left the European Union. I think our need to make concessions to them on the, for instance, on the kind of products that you refer to, is less than it may have been if they had been part of the European Union. So I would say to you that we have advantages that we can benefit from the UK on the economic, financial side. And yes, trade is a useful relationship, but it's not a major trading partner. And I don't see it becoming a major trading partner for some time to come now, unless the British radically change their policies.
Yeah, well, considering Mr. Johnson has come in on the focus of Brexit, one of the key sticking points, and this follow-up question to Ambassador Surie has been on immigration. Some of the conversations today have been around increasing the number of visas given to skilled Indians. Is that something that we are keen on diplomatically?
The immigration problem is again a problem created by the British. When I was there as High Commissioner, one of the very negative decisions taken by the British government then was to not allow students who are there on student visas to work for a couple of years after they had finished their education, pay back their loans, etc., and then come back home. We told them then that this would hurt them very badly, but they would not listen. And in the context of Brexit, to ask Indian workers to replace workers from Europe may not be such a good idea until you have a social security agreement in place. And as you would have seen from the documentation, one of the main sticking points is a social security agreement with the UK, which we have been negotiating for many years now. And the reason given to us formally was that this would this would mean a huge outflow of funds from the UK to India, which Britain cannot afford. So I think it's not simply a question of numbers, it's a question of conditions in which our workers will work and earn their salaries, and whether they would have social security and whether they can bring their savings back or not.
The broader context, of course, of Mr. Johnson's visit is the kind of quote-unquote nudging from Western nations on India's position or what they want to hear from us on Russia and Ukraine. This question to Ambassador Shankar. Is there a sense now that there is a greater understanding? We've had the Modi-Biden chat a few days ago. We now have the 2+2 which took place. Now we have the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Johnson. Do you think there is now an understanding that is coming in from that side that let's not push India further? They are on the same page, at least as far as humanitarian rights are concerned, and that's what matters.
Yes, I certainly believe that there is now a better understanding that there is a historical context and a geopolitical context to India-Russia relations and a defense partnership of long duration, which is important for India, particularly at this juncture when we have Chinese troops deployed on our borders. So I think there is a greater understanding. Though the West would like us to be more aligned with their position, they now understand that that is not going to happen. And that has been made clear by India in the dialogues that they've had. There is also a willingness to work together more closely in the context of the Quad, in the context of the Indo-Pacific, and a realization that if there are to be, alternatives for India in terms of defense, then the West has to work with us in terms of looking at more manufacturing in India, because the US-India Technology and Trade Initiative has not gone very far. We do purchase much more arms from the US because earlier we never used to purchase any. And India-US defense trade is about $20 billion. But very little, even in terms of the actual defense technology and trade initiative has taken place. So I think there is this greater recognition that India is not going to change, and public urging for India to change its position really has a negative impact here on public opinion and decision making.
That question to Ambassador Surie, as far as the whole global narrative is concerned, there seems to be no clear end or immediate end to the Russian attack on Ukraine and the geopolitical situation there. And India has been maintaining its stance very, very clearly. Do you think that there is now a greater understanding in the West, or behind the scene, will that nudging continue?
I think I agree with what Ambassador Meera Shankar said, but the nudging will continue, the pressure will continue. They will not let off the pressure. I think that is not the nature of the beast as far as this issue is concerned. Now, how this issue plays out is frankly anybody's guess. What are Russia's latest military objectives? If it is basically to take the entire Donbas region and cut off Ukraine from its access to the sea, that is one way of looking at it. The other is, will Russia still insist on Ukraine not becoming a NATO member? A lot of questions are out in the air right now. Nobody knows what's going to happen. I think one thing is quite clear, that NATO will keep assisting Ukraine to the extent that it can, to put up as much resistance as possible. To that extent, weaken the Russian military offensive. That Russia can achieve its limited military objectives in the nature that I spelled out can be achieved, I think is quite clear to everybody, no matter how much they say otherwise. So I think the idea is to maximize Russian losses and then see how it works out. There's so many questions to be asked or to be answered after this war comes to an end, or at least a ceasefire is announced. What will happen to the sanctions, for instance, on Russia? What will happen to the sanctions on the individuals who have been sanctioned in Russia, including President Putin himself? What will happen to the international institutions going forward? I think there's so much up in the air now that we really have to make sure that we are on the right side of the curve this time. And I think so far we are on the right side of the curve. We are keeping our options open. If you look at it from our perspective, we have been arguing for decades now that the international institutions which represent realities of the Second World War, post-Second World War period, no longer resemble contemporary, no longer are relevant in contemporary situations, then I think that is one set of answers which the world will have to come up with. Mr. Johnson has just promised us support once again for our permanent membership under the UN Security Council. I think it's a meaningless statement. They've been making these statements for years now. If the P4 want the Security Council to be expanded, why don't they just pass a resolution and say so? Leave China out. There are ways of going about this, but nobody is really sincere about changing an institution where they have the kind of unilateral veto power that they have. Now that it's fallen apart completely because one permanent member has chosen to go in a direction which has broken the past consensus completely. What is there to prevent others from doing that? The Americans have done it before. So we're in a situation where the international community, and I mean this time the entire world, not just the West, has carefully assess where they want the world to go. How do you ensure peace and stability? The UN Charter has, frankly, to my mind, become meaningless. It needs to be rewritten completely.
You know, interesting statement there from Ambassador Surie. We need to rethink the UN Charter. We need to rethink the promises that these permanent members have been making and all of these demands from India without clarifying what comes next from our perspective. So it's definitely a work in progress as we see and as this conflict between Russia and Ukraine continues. But for the time being, thank you so much, Ambassador Shankar, Ambassador Surie, for joining us on the show this evening and talking to us about the significance of Mr. Boris Johnson's visit.
Thank you.